Hello, 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 and welcome to the Blue Oval Podcast. I am Ben Weissland. Joining me, as always, Garrett Zadlin. How's it going, man?
Ben, it was a tough day yesterday watching Virginia Tech play football, and now currently I've decided that we're going to do the podcast during the Steelers game because the Commanders have begun to just uh, just really hammer them as well. It's been a tough sports weekend for me, um, but yeah, we're going to try to set this aside and stay positive for today's episode.
I thought you were going to say it was a tough week last week without me, and I was going to be like, it's okay, I'm
No,
back.
I don't
You
miss
don't
you.
have to worry
No,
about it.
no, don't miss you at all. Don't miss you at all. Hope you had fun though. Hope you had fun.
Well, we did have fun. We did just find out that my youngest has the flu and my
Nice.
oldest has an ear infection that they've been battling over the last week, and so we're all dead and dying, which is great. So I hope next week when we talk, I can be like, I feel great, my family feels great, and we're ready to move on. You know who does feel great though? Our audience.
Oh, they do.
One new rating on Apple, two new on Spotify, and we got this great review on Apple Podcast. Subject line 99. We got one more till we get to that 100
One
mark.
more.
Said cross country season would not be what it is without you, Ben and Garrett. Amazing content. I love how you guys hit all the conferences and teams. Looking forward to the regionals and finals assessment, the best time of the year. Also threw in a question of how can we get more visibility for cross country at the professional level. Thoughts there?
I actually want to table this and save this one for
Sure.
like
Okay.
a podcast after the cross country season because we should
Yeah.
do a fundamental like sport like where is our sport like podcast when we kind of have a little bit of dead time. So I
Yep.
like this question a lot. I have a lot of takes about that. But yeah, let's table that. But long story short, we need teams, and that's all I'm gonna say about that. So
Yep. Yeah. I think we're probably on the same page, and I agree. We can talk about that later because we got a lot to get into today. We have regionals preview. I'm going to go through and give my biggest winners and losers from the conference weekend since Garrett went solo last weekend. So yeah, let's just jump right into my biggest and winners and losers from conference weekend. And I'm sure I'll be hitting a lot of the same notes that you hit in your podcast, and I know that you mentioned a lot of this in your articles. But first off, Gary Martin. Holy smokes! What
yeah,
a race to individually get the individual win at ACCs over Ethan Strand, over a getting back into health. Parker Wolf. I think that's probably the right way of saying it. Um, just a really awesome performance. Puts a ceiling on Gary Martin that I don't think we could have really expected this year. Next up, BYU men. Super self-explanatory. I will puff out my chest a little bit, and I
yep.
felt like I thought that the BYU men had a chance. I wasn't necessarily saying that they were the best team, but I thought that this was going to be a meet that they attacked really hard. And ultimately, I'm not saying that Oklahoma State like threw in the towel, but I think they're ready. They're going to be a lot more prepared at the national meet. I think it's going to be a very close race. I'm going to still pick Oklahoma State
Yep.
when it comes to the national championship, but I thought that this could absolutely happen in BYU first Big 12 title. Awesome performance. On the women's side, Oregon women. I mean, what a performance! I had kind of thrown in the towel on both of the Oregon teams to a certain extent.
Why?
I just wasn't feeling that confident. But Solana Yildiz coming back, looking great. The Oregon women looked exactly as we thought they could at the beginning of the year, and their stars came out and they looked great. Oregon men, same kind of deal. Simeon Beerbaum, finally, like this is
Yep.
what we've been waiting for. What a run! Really excited to see that and how he can kick off from here. And then lastly, Wake Forest men. You were all over this, Garrett. You picked them. My pick, Notre Dame, crashed and burned hard,
Yep.
but it was Wake Forest without Rocky Hansen running well, which is like the most amazing part. They didn't even really need their best runner, and they looked awesome. So I can't imagine what we're going to see out of Wake Forest at the national meet. I think they have a sneaky high ceiling compared to a lot of the other teams in that range. Lowered their stock. I'll go with Notre Dame, man. They just really
Yeah, it's tough.
struggled. It was I remember when we talked about Joe Piani, I was like, let's not get ahead of ourselves, but I still thought they were just a very solid, consistent team that maybe didn't have a super high ceiling, but I also didn't think they had a very low floor. I think this was about
Yeah.
as bad of a performance as they could have put in, and unfortunately, it comes at ACCs. Michigan men, again, not like a crazy bad performance. Just this was an opportunity, I think, for them to elevate their stock a little bit, and it just didn't look great. And then LSU women, I was really high on them coming in. This is not necessarily saying that again, they're not going to be able to run well at regionals. I just thought that they had a really good shot at competing high up at SECs, and they just looked a little flat. They didn't have the oomph to that front of their lineup that I hoped that they would. So yeah, that's all my winners and the teams and individuals that lowered their stock. Anybody that I missed or you wanted to touch on out of that group?
Dude, I talked about that for an hour 20, technically an hour 50 the other day. So like I'm good on that. Yeah, I'm pass. Thanks.
I figured as much, but wanted to get my thoughts out there. It was a really
Yep.
exciting weekend. There's a lot of really good races, some surprising results. Conference weekend always delivers. With that said, let's go to another weekend that always delivers, and that is next weekend, regionals. We have a ton to talk about. How do we? So we you and I are going back and forth, looking at different Kolas scenarios. Do we want to go kind of region by region, talk about some of these like teams that are on the fringe, or do we want to kind of talk about the different scenarios of maybe a team needs in one region needs another team to do poorly to make sure that they get it in? How do we want to do this?
Yeah, yeah. Let's talk scenarios because I think a holistic picture is
Yeah,
better in terms of understanding where we eventually need to bounce around. There's going region by region. I mean, there's certain regions like the Midwest this year that just are largely non-factors.
yeah,
So I just before we begin though, I know we have a good number of parents and maybe people who are still new to the sport or new to the NCAA level who maybe have no idea what this weekend means or what the implications are. And so, long story short, the 9 regional meets will dictate who qualifies for as teams for the national championships. Top 2 teams in each region automatically advance, and then the committee selects 13 teams that finish behind those top 10 2 teams in each region to get an at-large bid. The process of selecting those teams is called the Kolas qualifying system. It's a very specific, complex, multi-criteria based qualification process that I'll pat myself on the back. I feel like I have a very strong grasp of it. I really like it a lot, but it's still really hard to do by hand. I've done it, but it's hard to do. Thankfully, in past years, we've had a guy named Bo Wagner who has had a computer program set up and it's done extremely well, has not yet been wrong. And now this year, there's a new website called kolascalc.com. That's KOLASCALC.com. They reached out and they said, "Hey, just want to let you know here's this, here's our site, here's what we have." They list all the B teams, they list all the criteria, and I even questioned them and I said, "Hey, do you have XYZ? Do you have the, pick later in the process if we know that they're going to get in later kind of clauses?" And they said, "Yeah, yeah, we do." And so went through, they showed, all the little details, and I think it all checks out. So that's the site that we're going to be using. Of course, not everything is official. We always got to be careful about that, but it's a really good site, and I think that's what we're going to use today.
absolutely. Yeah, it's I would check it out. The Garrett and I were talking about this before we got on. The user interface is awesome. It's just very easy to use, and there's good
Yep.
explanation on things. So, very useful for figuring out what your team needs to do in order to qualify for the national meet. Because yeah, the Colos situation complex, but I think we both agree a very fair one, or at least the most fair that we've come up with for qualifying teams to the NCAA meet. With that said, let's start on the men's side. And I think one of the most interesting regions on the men's side is out west. And I think this will very much determine a lot of spots available for teams in other regions because depending on the order that this region finishes, you could have 2 teams qualify for the national meet, and you could have up to 5 teams qualify for the national meet. It very much depends on that order, and really specifically, like, where does Portland land? If Portland finishes in an automatic qualifying spot, California Baptist, Washington, they both have a solid amount of points. Oregon probably is going to need to beat one of them. But after their performance at Big Tens, you feel like that is certainly possible. What do you think, or I guess any further analysis on what you are curious to see with this West region?
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to, does and we have Gonzaga projected 6. So in our projection, in my own projections, I should say, I have Stanford 1, I have Portland 2. Portland's not the popular pick to be the automatic spot. I think people would choose Washington or maybe even Oregon or Cal Baptist. Um, but like we also can't forget that Gonzaga peaks for the regional meet pretty consistently. And we have them 6, and I don't think they're going to be as strong as they were last year, but we said the same thing last year. So yeah, I think it's going to get really messy. I think Oregon cannot. They basically, if Portland joins Stanford as an automatic qualifier, Oregon needs to beat Washington or California Baptist in order to get in. But let's just say that Washington beats Portland, and they go Stanford, Washington, Portland, Oregon, CBU. No one advances in that scenario. No one, from an at-large perspective. And like I think everyone's looking at last weekend's Big Ten race for Oregon and being like, well, look at that. They're good. They tied with Washington, which doesn't matter because they didn't beat Washington. And I think everyone's like excited about, okay, this is clearly a national qualifying team. But there's probably more scenarios than not where
Yes.
Oregon does not make the team. Oregon does not make the national meet. Excuse me.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. Yeah, because I mean, even if you look at it where, let's say, yes, Oregon just doesn't finish what if they don't finish in the top 2, and then yeah, they don't beat because if they even if Washington finishes second and California Baptist finishes fourth, I don't let me make sure that that is right. I still don't think that they let's see here. I still don't
Wait,
think
who
they get in
or
there.
who or
Or
who
no, they do.
finishes?
So that's they either need Portland to run really, really well or Portland to drop. And in that scenario, they're going to get in if it goes Stanford, Washington, Oregon, California Baptist. Portland's kind of the X factor because they really don't have a ton of points. And so if they take one of those automatic qualifying spots, which I would disagree with you on that prediction. I think it's possible, but if they do take one of those spots, then you have teams like Washington and California Baptist who can push in Oregon. But if Portland drops back to fifth, then Oregon has to beat one of those top 3 teams, or else they're not going to make it.
No. And that's just the scary part. Like CBU is arguably just as good as Oregon and arguably just as good as Washington, and those spots are going to be up in the air. I like Portland because I think it's really the only bold thing that I can really predict here in these regional meets. And I also think like that they've never looked this good at this point in the season for the last 2 to 3 years. And
Sure.
this is also a team that traditionally peaks for the regional meet.
Yep.
They did it last year, so I think there's a little bit more of a possibility that happens. And ironically, if that does happen, Oregon is probably the biggest benefactor as long as they don't get fifth. Um, and
Yep.
again, all of this watch Gonzaga. Now, I think we should also just kind of give a layout of what our other picks are, or at least the
Sure.
ones that I have across the region, just so that everyone has an understanding of where we have certain teams. So Great Lakes men, I have Wisconsin, Notre Dame, Butler, Michigan State, Michigan. Mid Atlantic, Villanova, Princeton, Georgetown. Midwest, Oklahoma State, Iowa State. Mountain, BYU, Northern Arizona, New Mexico, Wyoming, Utah State, Texas Tech, Colorado, Colorado State, and Montana State. Syracuse in the Northeast, along with Harvard and Iona. In the South region, Alabama, Ole Miss. In the South Central region, Arkansas and Texas. Southeast, Wake Forest, North Carolina, Virginia, Eastern Kentucky, Furman, NC State in that order. So just to throw it out there. What else do you have on the West region, or did you want to move off of the West region?
Yeah, the only other thing that I'll say about the West region is we've seen Stanford run very well, but we also know that they can be a little volatile at times. One of the other scenarios that Oregon can hope for is Stanford does not take one of those two automatic qualifying spots. They have plenty of points. They're going to be pushing teams in if they finish fourth or further back. Now, that's a scenario that I think is pretty unlikely that they drop that far back. But even if they finish third and Oregon finishes fourth and California Baptist fifth, that's a good scenario for Oregon because Stanford will get in right away and allow the process for Oregon to get pushed in to happen sooner. So, just another kind of little bit of a wild card in the West is Stanford in my mind.
But they need to be in the top 4, Oregon, like, pretty much, like, across the
Yeah,
board.
yeah.
Now,
There really isn't a scenario where finishing worse than fourth puts them in. So
yeah, like, if they finish 5th behind all these teams, I don't see where
yeah,
they get in. I don't know how that happens, so, yeah, it seems unlikely, but, okay, moving off of that, let's chat about the mountain region, the men's mountain region. There is a realistic possibility that teams 7 teams advance. In fact, we do have 7 teams advancing in our
yep.
projections. BYU 1, Northern Arizona 2, they're the auto locks, followed by New Mexico, Wyoming, Utah State, all general at large selections. Texas Tech in 6 then gets pushed in by Colorado at 7. What was your takeaway when you were evaluating the mountain region, and more specifically how the Texas Tech, Colorado, or maybe even the other teams below them could play a role in this field?
Yeah, I mean, Texas Tech just needs to beat one of those top 6 teams, right? So, realistically, I think they have a shot at Wyoming, Utah State, and Colorado. We obviously have them over Colorado, but they need one of those spots. And we can talk later about who might be the beneficiary of them finishing 7th or below. But they need to take home. They need to finish in the top 6 to be able to qualify. I think pretty much they're any of these scenarios where, hey, let's say Wyoming finishes 7th or Utah State finishes 7th, I believe still pushes Texas Tech in. So it looks like there's almost certainly going to be 6 teams in. It's just whether or not Texas Tech punches their ticket by beating one of those teams because they just don't have the points to get in on their own at 7.
Yeah. You're right about the push. Like, again, Colorado State is this team that we're kind of unsure about after they beat Wyoming at the Mountain West Championships. So if Colorado finishes, gosh, who knows, like 5th, they get pushed. They finish 6th, they get pushed. Basically, if they finish anywhere in there, they're gonna get pushed in. But if they finish 7th, Texas Tech can't push them in unless another team goes through that. But largely, basically, if they fall to Texas Tech, it's likely over because they can't. Texas Tech doesn't have enough points to push themselves in. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You're talking about Colorado State needing, to at least beat Texas Tech,
They
right?
need to at
And
least beat Texas
and
Tech.
probably one of the other teams, right? I mean, if they finish, they got to finish in the top 6, Colorado State, to be able to make it.
Uh, they need to. Well, there's a scenario where it goes BYU, NAU, New Mexico, Wyoming, Colorado, Colorado State, Texas Tech, Utah State. Right. So if there's
Okay, so
no one
yeah, so
behind,
but that's still them in the top 6, right?
right, but
Um,
that doesn't advance them
oh, okay. So
because
you're
Texas
saying
Tech
not
can't
they
push
at
them in.
least have to do that, and even then they might not. That might not do the case. They might
Yeah,
not push them in.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
just
yeah.
so they need essentially New Mexico, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah State. They need one of those teams to finish directly behind them to then push them in.
There's not a scenario where we see 8 teams qualify, is there? I don't think so.
I don't think that's possible because, well, I mean, I guess it's technically possible, but you're it's extremely unlikely
Yeah.
because I think in that case, the Kolas points, you're looking at 2 push scenarios, which then you can't have. You can't have 2 push scenarios.
Right. Yeah. So I agree. Yeah. So Colorado State's going to need a very strong effort in order to qualify. It's going to be an uphill climb for them because even if they beat Colorado, they're not getting in. If they finish seventh to Colorado and Colorado finishes eighth, that is not going to be good enough. And in that scenario, Texas Tech also does not make it because they need Colorado to push them in. So Texas Tech has to hope they beat Colorado, but that Colorado doesn't fall too far because they are their ticket to the NCAA meet. And you can say the same thing about Wyoming or Utah State. If they beat one of those two teams and one of those two teams fall too far, then Texas Tech is in trouble. Anything else in the mountain region that we should cover?
No, I'm good on the mountain.
Okay. Well, let's talk about some teams that would benefit from maybe not the mountain or the west region not sending that many or as many teams as we project into the national meet. And one of the ones I wanted to talk about is in the northeast region,
Mm,
Iona. We
yep.
have them sitting in third, and then elsewhere in the Midwest region, third place team that we have projected is Tulsa. Both of these teams are going to be reliant to differing levels uh, of the results of the mountain and the west region. Now, Iona, I think, are in a little bit better shape
Hmm.
to be able to get in. But there are scenarios where Tulsa can also get in if, for whatever reason, the West only gets those two teams in. Maybe the Mountain only takes six teams or five teams, depending on those finishes. But they're going to be completely reliant, it seems, on these other regions because they're not going to be finishing more than likely in the top two for automatic qualifying spots.
Yeah, correct. Right. So I mean, Iona, you're right in the sense that like they're probably pretty safe as long as the general consensus Stanford Washington kind of happens
Right.
there
Then
in the
they're good.
mountain,
Yeah.
right? Or if Texas Tech, if they fall off out of a push scenario, right? Then that's even think that's fine. Yeah, then that's fine. But what really needs to happen as well for Tulsa on the Midwest side in their region is that Tulane like really benefits them if Tulane gets an auto in the South Central over Texas. Arkansas will be the other auto, no question about it. But Tulane and Texas are kind of like neck and neck right now. I think I'd still take Texas. But if Tulane gets the second place spot, then there's many scenarios, multiple scenarios where now Tulsa gets in and gets advances. And I think it's actually pretty late into the select. Yeah, they're like the second to last team selected. Um, so something to consider that
Yeah.
the South Central somehow will have a massive dictation on whether or not another team goes because that usually doesn't happen.
No, no, no. I mean, it's an interesting year where almost every region plays some kind of role in the overall national qualifying picture. A lot of times, I mean, the South region is kind of that region this year where I don't think it's going to have too much of an effect necessarily. It could, depending on maybe who that second automatic qualifying spot is behind Alabama, whether it's Ole Miss or Tennessee. Um, but yeah, it should be. I mean, each region we're going to be coming in these results, and it's going to play out or be a big deal. Um, any what's another region that is going to be pretty reliant on these mountain and west regional results?
Great Lakes, the Great Lakes
Yeah,
region on the men's side. I mean, I think we feel pretty good about Wisconsin and Notre Dame going 1-2, even if Notre Dame did have a little bit of a challenge there. But the issue, I guess, behind them is that Butler, Michigan State, and Michigan have not exactly been titans of industry this
no,
season. They haven't really been too exciting. In our scenario, again, we have Wisconsin men, Notre Dame 2 going 1-2 for the automatic spots. And then we have Butler 3, Michigan State 4, and Michigan 5. In this scenario, Butler gets an at-large bid, or I'm sorry, in my personal scenario, what happens there? In my personal scenario, only Butler gets in,
yep,
and that's because again, I have 5 teams in total coming out of the West region, along with Iona getting a spot in the Northeast. Butler, meanwhile, is the only team that advances, whereas
and they're the
Michigan State
last
and
team
Michigan,
in, I
and
think.
I believe they're the second to last team
Second
in this
last team, yeah.
scenario. With what Iona is the last team in that in
Right,
the
right.
my current scenario. But again, if just one thing changes, if Portland moves down to third and Washington gets second, two teams come out of the West region. Then all of a sudden, Great Lakes opens up to get Michigan State being pushed in by Michigan. And if Michigan State drops down to fifth, and Michigan beats them, then Michigan State and Michigan and Butler all get in on at-large bids. So really, it's one spot in the West region that will change everything. Now let's see what happens with Tulane beats Texas in my original projections. Now Michigan gets in, but Michigan State doesn't if it's a 4-5. Same thing if they swap. Oh, that's interesting. So in my current scenario, if you just put Tulane at 2 in the South Central, then Michigan State in fourth place still does not get in. Michigan in fifth doesn't
Oh,
get in.
interesting.
But if you put Michigan at 4, Michigan State at 5, Michigan gets in, Michigan State does not. So
Yeah.
basically, long story short, Michigan State is going to be Texas's biggest fan.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing to keep an eye on in all of that too is Tulsa. Depending on those results, if like let's say it goes Wisconsin, Notre Dame, Butler, Michigan, Michigan State, and in the South Central you have Arkansas, Texas, and then in the West we're talking like the Stanford, Washington. Then Michigan gets in, but Michigan State does not, and Tulsa gets a spot in the national meet with their third place finish in the Midwest. So yeah, I mean, just a ton. The key point is whether or not the West takes up 2 or 5 spots. Once that decision has been made, and once like if there are those 3 spots available, then that's when the South Central results get really interesting. That Texas Tulane, and then the Great Lakes results also get very interesting, and then they affect a lot of other people, which is really interesting to see. Just the cascading effect of one change in the West regional results.
I just want to clarify. I said that they're going to be Texas's biggest fan. I lied. I did some calculation. They're going to be Washington's biggest fan. So
Yes, yes.
Washington's biggest fan will be Michigan State. So yeah, it's crazy, man. It's a wild, like, it's crazy how much this could change. Just the smallest things. This is gonna be fun. This is gonna be really fun.
So just running through a couple other scenarios or a couple other regions here. Georgetown is pretty much safe
Yep.
at the Mid Atlantic number 3 spot. So you can feel good about, hey, Villanova, Princeton, Georgetown should all be going through. Out of the Southeast, now you have 5 teams that should feel very good. You
Hmm.
have Wake Forest, North Carolina, Virginia, Eastern Kentucky, and Furman. Now, if NC State or any other team somehow beats one of these teams, they're more than likely going to get a push scenario, or they could at least, depending on the West regional results. Let me just run that real quick. Yeah, so they're going to need, there could be push scenarios where one of those top 5 Southeast teams gets beat by another team if the West only takes 2 spots. Now, if they take 5 spots, now there's probably not going to be that push scenario where
Nope.
like
It
if
actually there is a push scenario.
oh, is there? In my
Stanford,
current
Portland.
scenario, there's not.
So who do you have? So let's say do you have NC State at 5?
Yeah,
So wait, read off your Southeast teams top 6.
Southeast, I have Wake Forest, North Carolina, Virginia, Eastern Kentucky, NC State, Furman.
Who do you have on the West side?
West Side, Stanford, Portland, Washington, Oregon, California Baptist. I might have a differing.
You probably have something different elsewhere. And is it the mountain? Is it South Central? Do you have a different? I have Texas.
Oh, I have Texas too. Let me see. Maybe it
What's
was
your
the. Whoa, that's interesting. Um, so it was the Great Lakes, because now in this scenario, Butler doesn't even get in.
wait? What? Wait, wait. Who do you where? Read off your Great Lakes order. What?
All right, so previously I had Wisconsin, Notre Dame, Butler, Michigan, Michigan State. But if I
Okay.
flip it and I go Michigan State at 4 and Michigan at 5, then that's when Butler does not make it,
I
Tulsa
have.
does not make it, Iona does not make it, and you get 6 teams in the Southeast.
Oh, I had Colorado. That's where mine was. I had Colorado at. 6. I didn't move them,
Okay.
so you
Yeah.
that makes sense. Yeah, and now Butler does not make it. Correct. So basically, NC State push scenarios in the Mountain and Southeast are basically a death sentence for the Great Lakes.
Yes.
And frankly, everywhere else, like everywhere
Everywhere
except
else,
the
yeah, pretty much. Yeah, like again, it comes back to the West. If the West takes up those three extra spots, and like if any other region takes up an additional spot, like the Southeast, then like no one else is getting like those at large bids outside of like the Mid Atlantic and the Mountain. Everyone else is just down to their automatic qualifying spots essentially.
Man, this is like I didn't that's a very realistic scenario that we just
Yeah.
outlined. Like it's a very realistic scenario. So yeah, that's pretty wild. Okay, cool. Do we want to head to the women?
Yeah. Let's head to the women. So on the women's side, not quite as much volatility in my mind.
Yep.
What were the things that stood out to you as like the keys to different Colas scenarios?
Yeah, let me just quickly read off some of the top teams here in each region. So I
Yeah,
had
go ahead.
Notre Dame 1, Wisconsin 2, Michigan State 3, Toledo 4 in the Great Lakes region, Mid Atlantic, West Virginia, Georgetown, Penn State, Princeton, Villanova in that order, Midwest, Oklahoma State and Minnesota, Mountain, BYU, Northern Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, Utah Valley, Colorado State, Texas Tech, Colorado. In the Northeast region, I had Providence, Boston College, Syracuse, Harvard, Connecticut in that order. South region, Alabama, Florida, Tennessee, Florida State, Lipscomb in that order. In the South Central, Arkansas, Texas, Tulane, LSU in that order. Southeast, NC State, North Carolina, Virginia, Furman, Liberty, Wake Forest in that order. And then in the West region, Oregon, Washington, Stanford, Gonzaga, Portland in that order.
To be clear,
Now,
you have in the Mid Atlantic, you have Villanova finishing fifth. Is that right or
correct.
fourth? Okay.
I have them finishing. Oh, I'm sorry. I take that back. I do have them finishing fourth.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Yeah,
Which I don't
that's
think
what I
really,
had too.
which does not matter much, but yeah. And
No.
so just to
No.
clarify to everyone who maybe doesn't know, when I read all those teams, I'm not saying that those are all the teams that are going to qualify. I'm just saying
Right.
those are all teams that could maybe possibly sort of play a factor.
Yeah.
Now, my biggest takeaway from all of this is that the Great Lakes, Michigan State, and Toledo are going to be heavily dependent on what happens in the South region, which is basically Lipscomb getting fifth, but also like Tulane, whatever happens in the South Central,
Yeah.
it's going to be a
South
little
Central.
tricky. Yeah, it's going to be a
Yeah.
little tricky
Yeah.
there.
Yes. South Central is really interesting because there are some scenarios where Texas, if they finish third, could get a spot, a qualifying spot, and then a Toledo finishing fourth in the Great Lakes could lose that spot, uh, depending on that result, which is very interesting. Um, there isn't like when you run this, there isn't like one region that's sucking up like 6 or 7 spots. You have the West region with 4, the South almost almost I hesitate to say almost certainly, but it seems very likely that 5 teams are going to qualify out of that group, and they seem to be a step above of everyone else in that region. The Mountain should take home 4 spots, and then the Great Lakes. That's where it's like, hey, do they get 3? Do they get 4? Depends on some of these scenarios.
The way Lipscomb doesn't get in the South region is I think they're projected to finish fifth. I think they will finish fifth. But if you put Alabama at 2 and Texas at 2 in their respective regions, Lipscomb gets in. But then the moment you flip Tulane to 2, Lipscomb does not get in and Toledo does. What if you just put Tennessee now and Tulane at 2? Lipscomb gets in, but now put Texas at 2 with Tennessee at 2. Lipscomb still gets in. Toledo gets in. Michigan State gets in. Um, yeah, yeah, and there's nothing else. So it it's pretty. I don't want to say it's pretty chalk, but there aren't too many scenarios outside of like the tail end of South region, Great Lakes, and who's the auto in South Central, where things can get tricky.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of these at-large teams are going to be rooting for Texas to just take home that second spot, right? Because there's the potential if they finish third and Tulane finishes second, then that's an at-large spot that a lot of these other teams would would possibly be losing out on. Um, trying to think on this mid-Atlantic side. So if Villanova pulls an upset, beats Penn State, they will get pushed in by Penn State. Toledo will lose one of their spots, but Lipscomb still remains. So that is one place where we could see a possible push. Penn State pushing in the number 3 team in the Mid Atlantic. Toledo looks like they would be the team that would be losing out in that scenario, though.
If who's your second in the South Central?
That would be Texas.
Interesting. So that means you have Tennessee as your second in the South. Oh
I
no,
have
never
Florida
mind.
as my second in the South.
Um, okay, yeah, no, never mind, never mind. I see why I had something different. I had something different. Okay. What happens if Liberty? Let's play this game. What happens if Liberty beats Furman and they get fourth? So, ooh, in theory, they
Wait,
should
that's
push
not
them
right.
in. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
There's a slight glitch there where I think that should get pushed in, and in that
But
scenario,
Toledo, yeah, yeah, there's a glitch. Yeah, but
yeah.
Toledo's out,
So
and
and
that
Michigan State would be out as well, and it would be Lipscomb as the last team in because Furman has to get pushed. Yeah, Furman. Yeah, so that's definitely what happens because even if they push in Liberty, Liberty doesn't give any points to anyone, and that's exactly what would happen. And so the rest of the calculations would be the same, except Michigan State does not get in. Michigan State would be the first team out if that happens, at least in our
interesting.
scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What
I'll send
happens?
an email.
What happens if does LSU doesn't have really any points, right? LSU needs to finish second.
Yeah,
Then Texas gets in that scenario. Toledo, yeah. So really unless there's just a huge upset on the women's side, a lot of these teams are pretty locked in. You look at like the Northeast region, Providence, Boston College, Syracuse feeling very strong, Mountain, BYU, NAU, New Mexico, Utah. You feel pretty good about all 4 of those teams will almost certainly get in. Out west, Oregon, Washington, Stanford, Gonzaga, those 4 teams should almost certainly get in as well. There just isn't a ton of volatility on the women's side, barring. I mean, if there is a huge upset, then all of a sudden we can throw up all our notes and say that hey, maybe there's some teams that will get the short end of the stick elsewhere. But if things go even relatively chalk, you're going to be expecting like 29 out of the 31 teams to remain the same. There's like 1 or 2 spots that it seems are a little bit volatile.
yeah, yeah, and that's surprising. Like last year, I mean, it was kind of like the South region kind of dictated everything, and
Right.
it still kind of does, but not nearly to the extent as it did last year. And yeah, the Great Lakes, like if you're Toledo and you're Michigan State, you are really saying some prayers. It feels like there's some scenarios you get in, half the scenarios you don't. It feels like a 50-50 shot, just based on what I'm running and projecting. So, and other than like a small little tweak that I need to email to update them, I think that's it. I think that's all the scenario. Well, what happens if Harvard? One more scenario, Northeast. What happens if Harvard beats Boston College? What happens if Harvard beats Syracuse and they get third and then they get pushed in? Right. In that scenario, Toledo
So
is.
they would get pushed in. It would be the Great Lakes that would be losing out.
It's
Um,
always the Great Lakes. Toledo gets the short end of the stick almost every time.
yeah.
Mm. But hey, they could
Yeah,
beat
I
Michigan
mean
State.
yeah, Toledo is the most tenuous team, I think, out of all of these, right?
Well, I think it's whoever's the fourth place team in that
Right.
region.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
4th place in
So,
Great Lakes is hanging on by a thread, needing things to go very chalk. Otherwise, they are in trouble. I mean, yeah, a lot of these teams though, it's like you look at the Mountain's top 4 teams, the South's top 4 teams, the West top 4 teams, like even if a lot of these teams don't finish in the top 4 and they finish in the top 5, they have points. They can push people in. It would just really be, hey, you get an extra team in one of those regions, and then you lose a team from the Great Lakes. It's not like it has huge knock on effect like we saw on the men's side, where hey, the West could either go from 2 to 5, and then hey, there's three qualifying spots now in the Open, and that it can waterfall into a lot of other different scenarios. With the women, it would again. I keep coming back to it, a cataclysmic upset for anything major to change.
All right, before we go, give me one bold prediction on the men's side, Kolas speaking, and one bold prediction on the women's side, Kolas speaking.
Yeah. I mean, is it bold to say Oregon does not make the national meet on the men's side? I mean,
I think it's
we just
I think it's bold enough. Yeah, I mean, I think that's still something that people are still trying to process. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I again, they ran fantastic Big Tens. I keep wanting to say Pac-12s. I have to like check myself every time I say that. But I just think there's too many moving variables for them. Uh, they have to run exceptionally well, or they need to get a little help and still run pretty well. So I think it's going to be an uphill climb for the Oregon men to make nationals, and I will have them outside of the top 31 after the next weekend.
My bold prediction, which I guess kind of goes against all of my projections. So, like, if you're listening to this, just have fun with it. Okay, I'm trying my best, but it goes against my projections. But in this case, I think Butler places fifth and does not advance, and therefore Tulsa does not advance. Therefore, Georgetown does not advance. Therefore, Iona does not advance. And if
Whoa,
that's
wait,
the
wait. Georgetown doesn't make it if Butler
because
finishes fifth.
Michigan pushes in Michigan State, yeah, Georgetown does not get in. Um,
Whoa.
Yeah, if that so yeah, if it goes Michigan State, Michigan, Butler, and I'm looking to make sure I didn't have any other tweaks around my projections. I did not. If you just put Butler down to fifth, Michigan pushes in Michigan State and therefore leaves on the chopping block Tulsa, Iona, Georgetown.
So if
And Butler
we,
does not get in.
yeah, and Butler is not again. So let's say the Washington finishes second out west,
Think
and in
that
this
saves
scenario,
them. That
then
saves them. That
then
saves them. That
Georgetown
saves
still does not make it.
no.
Tulsa makes it. Iona makes it.
But Georgetown does not make it.
Interesting. And Butler does get in. Wow.
And Butler does get in. So wait, it basically, long story short, if Butler gets fifth in a likely scenario, if then Georgetown's done.
Georgetown.
Butler's biggest
That's
fan will be Georgetown.
yeah. I mean, I was saying before all this, Georgetown's pretty locked in, and I mean they still are. Like this would require Butler finishing fifth, but this is a pretty clear scenario where hey, if this happens,
That could
they're
happen
in
though.
trouble. They're in trouble. Yeah, exactly. So,
So
whew.
that's my men's prediction. Um,
All right.
women's
Um,
side. Oh, sorry. Go
ugh.
ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the women's side, I'm having a tough time. I'm gonna go back to an old well. Despite their poor performance at SECs, I still really like this team, and I do not like a lot of these South Central teams. I am going with LSU takes home the second automatic qualifying spot.
I don't hate that. I really don't hate that at all. I was actually thinking about that being my own. I will go and say in the West region, Portland upsets, let's say a Gonzaga of sorts, right? And gets fourth and therefore gets pushed in. In that scenario, who jumps out? Michigan State does not get a bid.
Wait, I'm saying
That's
Michigan State does. Am I?
if you or in the women's West region. If you who's your South Central auto?
Sorry, who was
Who
that?
who who's your South Central auto?
Oh, it is Arkansas, Texas.
Okay, I have Texas. Yeah. I have Oregon, in the West region. I have Oregon, Washington, Stanford, Portland,
Portland.
Gonzaga as my like bold prediction, right? And
Yeah, and then I
therefore,
have Michigan State getting in, Toledo out, and Syracuse. Yeah, Syracuse at third.
then it depends on your South region. So then, what's your South region in order?
South, I have Alabama, Florida, Tennessee, Florida State.
That's why I have Tennessee. I had Tennessee. in that
Oh,
scenario. Yeah. And so, what? Okay, so then flip it. Florida in second now. Yeah, Portland still does get in on the push, but Toledo gets in. Michigan State does not. Yeah.
yeah, interesting. Okay, I don't hate that one either. I think Gonzaga has been very good, but I think that there is a chance they get upset by Portland. But yeah, I'm super fascinated by the men's side. The women's side, the more we talk
Talk.
about this, it's just it's there's probably not going to be like our Slack channel is not going to be blowing up midway through the day of regionals because hey, there was this big women's result and now all these teams are in danger of not qualifying. As soon as we see that West result out on the men's side, which we will have seen a lot of results before that, we're gonna know pretty quickly what everything is gonna shake out to be.
Yeah, that's gonna be wild. But again, kolascalc.com. Go check that out. I'll put it in the description, or maybe Wyatt will. And then, of course, stay tuned to the site. I will be giving projections. I'll be, writing this all out, and we'll kind of be going, breakdown by breakdown. Also, if you have no idea what we're talking about, go to the website, thestridreport.com, and under the content tab, I have a Kolas tab. And under that, you can go click that, and you can see what the teams were that qualified last year, what teams were first team out, last team in, and then also on that tab, extending to the right of it, is a page called Understanding Kolas. It actually is our best performing SEO page that we have. If you like we dominate that,
Makes sense.
and it's extremely helpful. People have said it's one of their favorite pages because it perfectly breaks down the Kolas scenario. It's very in depth, but very easy to process, I assume.
Readable.
So yeah, it's
Yeah.
very readable.
Yeah.
So go check that out. But Ben, I think that's it.
Yeah, make sure you guys check that out so you could figure out, hey, why did your team just squeeze in or why did your team get screwed? We've had some really just like getting into the minutia of the Colos rules in the past few years. What was it? Was it Gonzaga a couple of years ago that
Oh,
got
it still
Gonzaga
upsets me.
men
Still
that
upsets me.
that just
That
barely didn't make it because of just the smallest difference. Like if they had lost, right? If they
if
had
they had
done one spot worse at regionals, they would have made it. But because they finished a little higher up, they didn't. I mean, generally, you don't see these kind of things with Colas. Like again, it has its weird rules where it's like situations like that can happen. But 9 times out of 10, it's a good way of encouraging teams to compete in the regular season and sending the best 31 teams to the national meet. But yeah, read that before you get into regionals. It'll help you understand all of this. So
yeah. Okay, that's all I got.
all right. Well, until next week, Garrett. I'll talk to you.
I'll talk to you.